"Will you stay if I undress?" Black Widow asked, after the biker saved her in the river. That's what people said happened the night a lonely widow's motorcycle flew off a bridge, and a stranger dove into the raging river to save her life. But when he carried her out of the water, he didn't just rescue a woman. He stepped straight into a town full of cruel whispers, dark secrets, and a past nobody wants to talk about. Everyone calls her Black Widow, claiming she destroyed the man she loved. But a hidden message left behind the night he died suggests something far more shocking. And the stranger who saved her? He's the first person brave enough to ask why the whole town is so desperate to keep the truth buried. When the lies start unraveling and the town turns against them both. What happens when the only person who believes in you is the one the whole town wants gone? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the worn leather of Lena's motorcycle jacket as she guided her bike along the winding road toward Willow Bend Bridge. Each drop felt like another whispered accusation, the same ones that had followed her through town for the past 2 years. Black Widow, they called her, as if she'd meant for any of it to happen. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the weathered wooden planks of the bridge ahead. The old structure groaned under the weight of the storm, its timbers slick with rain. Lena's hands trembled on the handlebars, her thoughts as turbulent as the swollen river churning 20 feet below. She was so tired. Tired of the sideways glances, the conversations that stopped when she entered the hardware store, the way mothers pulled their children closer when she passed, as if grief were contagious, as if she hadn't lost enough already. Another flash of lightning, closer this way. The thunder crashed overhead just as her front tire hit a slick patch on the bridge. Lena felt the bike wobble, then slide. Her heart lurched as the handlebars jerked violently to the right. She fought to regain control, but momentum carried her straight toward the aging guardrail. The wood splintered like matchsticks. For one suspended moment, Lena hung in the air, the world tilting crazily around her. Then gravity took hold, and she plunged toward the angry waters below. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Icy water rushed in, dragging her under. Her heavy jacket pulled her down as the current tumbled her like a leaf in the wind. Up became down, and the surface seemed impossible to find. Her lungs burned. Darkness crept at the edges of her vision. Jonah Rourke had seen it happen. He'd been following at a distance, concerned about the lone rider ahead in such treacherous conditions. When the bike crashed through the railing, he didn't hesitate. He brought his own motorcycle to a skidding stop, threw off his jacket, and dove into the churning river. The water was like ice, the current strong enough to sweep away a grown man. But Jonah had years of search and rescue experience, and he'd be damned if he'd let someone die on his watch. He fought against the flow, scanning the dark water for any sign of the rider. There, a flash of leather in the murky depths. Jonah dove deeper, his powerful strokes carrying him toward the sinking figure. He caught hold of an arm and pulled hard, kicking for the surface. The rider was limp in his grasp, dead weight against the current's pull. They broke the surface together, Jonah gasping for air as he towed his rescue toward the shore. The muddy bank was slippery under his feet as he dragged them both out of the water. Only then did he see it was a woman, her face pale and still beneath her wet hair. "Come on," he muttered, laying her flat on the ground. No breathing, no pulse. Jonah tilted her head back and began CPR, his compressions steady and strong. "Don't you give up on me." 1 minute passed. 2. Rain pelted them both as Jonah continued his efforts, refusing to quit. Finally, the woman convulsed, water spewing from her mouth as she coughed violently. Jonah turned her onto her side, supporting her as she emptied her lungs of river water. "Easy now," he said softly. "You're safe. Just breathe." Her eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear clouding their depths. What happened?" "Your bike went off the bridge, but you're going to be okay." Jonah could hear sirens in the distance. Someone must have seen the accident and called for help. "Help's coming. Can you tell me your name?" "Lena," she whispered, then started shivering uncontrollably. "Lena Harwood." Jonah shrugged out of his flannel shirt, wrapping it around her shoulders. "I'm Jonah. Just stay with me, Lena. The ambulance is almost here." The paramedics arrived moments later, their emergency lights painting the rain red and white. As they loaded Lena onto a stretcher, one of them asked, "Is there family we should contact?" Lena's voice was barely audible over the storm. "No, there's no one." Something in those words struck Jonah deep in his chest. He'd spent years drifting, choosing solitude over connection. But the raw pain in her voice, the weight of that loneliness, it stirred something in him he thought he'd buried long ago. "I'll follow you to the hospital," he told the paramedics, already heading for his bike. He wasn't sure why he felt so compelled to stay, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Lena Harwood needed someone in her corner tonight. The emergency room was quiet when they arrived, the storm having kept most people home. Jonah watched as they wheeled Lena through the double doors, then settled into one of the hard plastic chairs in the waiting area. His clothes were still damp, his muscles aching from the fight with the river. But he didn't move. Hours ticked by. Nurses came and went, but no worried family members arrived to ask about Lena. No friends appeared with flowers or concerned faces. The solitude that usually comforted Jonah now felt heavy, oppressive. He shifted in his chair, studying the institutional art on the walls without really seeing it. What was he doing here? He was just passing through, like always, getting involved, letting himself care. That wasn't part of his plan. But every time he thought about leaving, he remembered the defeat in Lena's voice when she said she had no one to call. A doctor emerged from the treatment area, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Rourke, Ms. Harwood is stable. We're keeping her overnight for observation, but she's asking for you." Jonah nodded, standing slowly. He walked to the doorway of Lena's room but didn't enter, taking in the sight of her small form in the hospital bed. She looked fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights, but there was something else there too, a hidden strength like steel wrapped in silk. He settled into a chair outside her room, close enough to hear if she called out, far enough to give her space. The pull he felt toward her made no sense. He was a drifter, a man who'd learned the hard way not to put down roots. But as he watched Lena's chest rise and fall in the quiet of the hospital night, Jonah realized he wasn't going anywhere, at least not yet. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the hospital walls, something shifted. Two souls, each carrying their own wounds, had collided like stars in the vast dark. Neither knew it yet, but their paths had become inexorably intertwined in the swirling waters of that rain-swollen river. The morning sun filtered weakly through the hospital blinds as Lena Harwood signed her discharge papers. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from exhaustion or the lingering effects of hypothermia. She wasn't sure. The nurse reviewed her aftercare instructions one final time, emphasizing rest and monitoring for any delayed symptoms. Jonah Rourke stood quietly in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He'd stayed all night, though Lena couldn't fathom why. She'd caught glimpses of him through her fitful sleep, a steady presence in the chair outside her room. "Your motorcycle's been towed to the impound lot," he said softly. "I can help you sort that out later, but for now, How about I walk you home? Lena's cheeks flushed. You don't have to do that. I've already caused enough trouble. It's no trouble, and the nurse mentioned you live just a few blocks away. She knew she should refuse. Good things didn't last in her world anymore. But her legs felt weak, and the thought of walking home alone made her chest tight. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. They stepped out into the morning light, Lena wrapping her arms around herself despite the warmth. The streets of Willow Bend were beginning to stir with early morning activity. As they walked, she felt the familiar weight of stairs following them. A woman hurried her children across the street. An elderly man shook his head disapprovingly. Black Widow, someone whispered, just loud enough to hear. Lena's shoulders hunched further. She could feel Jonah's questioning glance, but couldn't bring herself to explain. Let him figure it out on his own, like everyone else did. Then he'd leave too. They walked in silence until they reached her small cottage at the edge of town. The garden was overgrown, morning glories climbing wild over the fence. Paint peeled from the shutters. She fumbled with her keys, aware of how the place must look to an outsider. I'm sorry about the mess, she said automatically as they stepped inside. The interior was dim and cluttered, blankets strewn across the couch, books piled on every surface. A kettle whistled sharply on the stove. She'd forgotten to turn it off before yesterday's ride. Oh no, she hurried toward the kitchen, but Jonah was already there, calmly moving the kettle to a cool burner. Sit, he said gently. You need to rest. To her amazement, he began straightening up. His movements were careful, respectful, not judging the chaos but simply bringing order to it. He folded blankets, stacked books, opened curtains to let in light. The kindness in each simple action made her throat ache. Why are you being so nice to me? The words burst out before she could stop them. Everyone in town knows what I am, what I did. Jonah paused in his tidying. I don't know anything except that you needed help last night, and you still do. I don't deserve help. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Fear and exhaustion and years of loneliness crashed over her like another wave. I don't deserve kindness. Do you want to see why? Her trembling fingers went to the buttons of her shirt. Will you stay if I undress? If I show you everything? Jonah stiffened, his expression darkening. He took a step toward the door, and Lena's heart shattered all over again. Of course he would leave. Wait, she choked out. Please, I'm not trying to seduce you. I want to show you the scars, the bruises, everything I hide under long sleeves and layers because I can't bear for anyone to see what I've become. She sank onto the couch, wrapping her arms around herself. Everyone thinks I killed my husband, that I drove him to crash his car that night. The perfect wife turned Black Widow. But they don't know about the drinking, the rages, the marks he left. They don't know I was trying to leave, and he found out, and... She couldn't continue. The couch dipped as Jonah sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. His voice was very gentle when he spoke. Lena, look at me. She raised her tear-stained face. You don't have to earn kindness by humiliating yourself. You don't have to prove you deserve help by showing your wounds. Whatever happened in the past, whatever people say, you're safe right now. That's what matters. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these felt different. Cleansing somehow. I have nowhere else to be today, Jonah continued. If you want, I'll stay and help you get settled after the accident. We can make some tea, maybe get some food in you. No expectations, no judgments, just two people sharing a quiet day. Lena nodded, unable to speak. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of isolation lifted slightly. She didn't understand why this stranger was showing her such compassion. but in that moment, she allowed herself to accept it. Jonah stood and moved to the kitchen, his movements unhurried and calm as he filled the kettle with fresh water. The simple domestic sounds, water running, cupboard doors opening, filled the cottage with a sense of normalcy that had been missing for so long. She watched him through tear-blurred eyes, this quiet man who had pulled her from the river and was now, somehow, helping her find her way back to solid ground. The morning sun strengthened, casting warm squares of light across the floor, and for the first time in years, Lena felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The kitchen seemed smaller with Jonah in it. His calm presence filled the space as he moved with quiet efficiency, filling the kettle and searching through cabinets until he found 2 mugs and a box of chamomile tea. "You should sit," he said, noticing how Lena's hands trembled. "I've got this." She sank into a kitchen chair, watching as he worked. The simple domesticity of it, a stranger making tea in her kitchen, felt both surreal and oddly comforting. Steam rose from the kettle as he poured water over the tea bags, the familiar scent of chamomile filling the air. "Sugar?" he asked. "No, thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. He set the mug in front of her, then took the chair across the table. Neither spoke as the tea steeped, the silence broken only by the soft patter of water dripping from the eaves outside. "Your hands are shaking," he observed gently. "When's the last time you ate something?" Lena tried to remember. "Yesterday? Maybe? Everything's a blur." Jonah stood and opened her refrigerator, frowning at its sparse contents. He managed to find bread and butter, making her 2 simple pieces of toast. "It's not much, but it's a start." As she nibbled at the toast, Jonah began quietly cleaning the kitchen. He washed the few dishes in the sink, wiped down counters, and straightened the magnets on her refrigerator that had gone askew. His movements were unhurried, respectful, as if he understood that even this small act of caring was overwhelming for her. When he finished, he glanced out the window toward the river. "I should get your motorcycle before someone else finds it. You shouldn't have to deal with that alone." Lena's eyes widened. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. "Rest. I'll be back soon." She watched from the window as he walked down the muddy path toward the river, his broad shoulders set with purpose. The morning sun was burning away the last of the storm clouds, creating patches of brightness that seemed to follow his steps. Alone in the cottage, Lena wrapped her hands around the warm mug of tea. Her body ached from the accident, but it was more than physical pain. Every kind gesture from this stranger stripped away another layer of the protective numbness she'd built around herself. Almost an hour passed before she heard his boots on the porch. When he opened the door, his clothes were muddy and wet, but his expression was troubled. "I found your bike," he said. "It's pretty banged up, but nothing that can't be fixed." He hesitated, then reached into his jacket. "I also found this in one of the saddlebags." He held out a sodden envelope, the paper wrinkled and water-stained. Lena's heart stopped when she recognized the handwriting. That's Mark's writing," she whispered, staring at her late husband's familiar scrawl. The postmark was smeared but still visible, dated the night he died. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the envelope. Jonah sat beside her, steadying her fingers with his own as they carefully peeled open the wet paper. Inside was a single sheet, the ink running slightly but still legible. "I'm finally ready to tell you everything. Meet me at the bridge." The words hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed back in her chair, the room spinning around her. He was going to tell me. He wanted to meet that night. All these years, she'd thought Mark had driven off in anger after their last fight, had crashed because of drinking and rage. But this letter suggested something else entirely. Had he been planning to confess something? To apologize? To finally explain the darkness that had consumed their marriage? "All this time," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought I knew what happened that night. I thought—" She couldn't continue, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in everything she'd believed about Mark's death. A violent tremor ran through her body, not from cold, but from the weight of this revelation. Jonah quietly stood and retrieved a soft blanket from the couch. As he draped it around her shoulders, his touch was gentle, anchoring her in the present moment even as the past threatened to sweep her away. The letter lay on the table between them, its water-stained message changing everything Lena had believed about the night that had defined her life for so long. A fragile seed of hope took root in her heart. Not hope for changing the past, but hope that perhaps the truth wasn't as simple as everyone had believed. Perhaps there was more to the story than the cruel whispers and accusations that had followed her for years. She clutched the blanket tighter, trembling as possibilities she'd never dared consider opened before her. Jonah remained beside her, a steady presence as her world tilted on its axis, offering the quiet support she needed while this new reality settled around her. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Bend's quiet streets as Jonah walked toward the small grocery store on Main Street. He'd waited until Lena had fallen into an exhausted sleep before slipping out to get supplies. Her kitchen had been nearly empty, just a few tea bags and that loaf of bread. After everything she'd been through, she needed real food to help her recover. The bell above the grocery store door chimed as he entered. The elderly cashier's welcoming smile faded when she saw him, replaced by a wary expression. As he gathered basic supplies, eggs, milk, bread, fruit, and some soup, he couldn't help but notice the whispers following him through the aisles. "That's the stranger who pulled her out," one woman murmured to another, not bothering to lower her voice. "Foolish thing to do, if you ask me. Everyone knows she drove off that bridge on purpose." Jonah's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on selecting oranges, pretending not to hear. "Just like her husband," another voice added, "probably trying to follow him. Now she's dragged some innocent traveler into her mess." At the checkout counter, the cashier barely met his eyes. "You're not from around here," she said, scanning his items slowly. It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," Jonah replied evenly. "Best keep passing, then." The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. "That Harwood woman, she's trouble. The whole town knows it. Her husband wasn't the first man she destroyed, and he won't be the last." Jonah paid for the groceries without responding, but his mind was churning. The casual cruelty in their words, the way they'd decided Lena's guilt without evidence, it stirred something protective in him. He'd seen that look in Lena's eyes, the one that spoke of years of judgment and isolation. Now he understood why. As he walked back toward Lena's cottage, carrying 2 paper bags of groceries, more whispers followed him. 2 men outside the hardware store shook their heads. A group of women on a porch stopped talking as he passed, their disapproving stares burning into his back. He was nearly at Lena's gate when he heard raised voices from her neighbor's yard. 2 women were talking loudly, clearly meant to be overheard. "Mark Harwood was such a good man before he met her," one said. "She'll do the same to this one. Drag that biker down just like she did her husband." Through Lena's partially open window, he could see her standing frozen in her kitchen, face pale as she listened to the cruel words. When she saw him approaching, panic flashed across her features. She yanked the window closed and disappeared from view. Jonah found her pacing in the kitchen, wringing her hands. "You have to leave," she blurted out as soon as he set down the groceries. "You can't stay here. They're already talking about you, about us. I won't let you become part of this nightmare." Lena, he said quietly, but she continued pacing. One night of knowing me, and they're already trying to destroy your reputation too. I should never have let you help me. I should have. Her voice cracked. I should have just let the river take me. Jonah stepped into her path, forcing her to stop. Look at me, he said firmly. When she wouldn't meet his eyes, he gently tilted her chin up. I don't care what they say. I'm not leaving until I know you're okay. But they'll never stop, she whispered. As long as I'm here, as long as people don't know the truth about Mark's death, they'll keep spreading their poison. They'll hurt anyone who tries to help me. Then we'll find the truth. Lena stared at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. What? That letter we found. It proves there was more going on that night than anyone knew. Your husband wanted to tell you something important. Maybe finding out what that was is the key to stopping all this. But how? The police investigated. They found nothing suspicious about the crash. Jonah began unpacking the groceries, his movements deliberate and calm. Sometimes fresh eyes see things others miss. I've done search and rescue work. I know how to investigate accidents, talk to people, piece things together. And you knew your husband better than anyone. Between us, we might find answers everyone else missed. You'd really help me? Lena's voice was small, disbelieving. Even after hearing what they say about me? I make my own judgments about people, Jonah said firmly, and nothing I've seen matches what they're saying about you. Besides, he added with a slight smile, I was planning to stay a few days anyway, to make sure you recovered from the accident. Might as well make those days count. Lena watched him arrange food in her nearly empty refrigerator, his steady presence already making her kitchen feel more like a home than it had in years. She thought about Mark's letter, about the secrets he'd wanted to share that night. For the first time since his death, she felt something other than crushing guilt and shame. She felt purpose. Okay, she said softly. Where do we start? First, you eat something substantial while I make a list of people we should talk to. Jonah pulled out a chair for her. Then we start putting together a timeline of that night. Everything you remember, everything that seemed odd or out of place. The truth is out there, Lena. We just have to find it. As Jonah moved around her kitchen, making her eggs and toast, Lena felt tears prick her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from a strange mixture of hope and gratitude. This stranger had walked into her life less than 24 hours ago, and instead of running from the darkness surrounding her, he was willing to help her face it head-on. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone with her burden. The whispers and judgment still hurt, but they didn't seem quite as powerful with Jonah's steady presence beside her. Together, they would uncover what really happened the night Mark died, not just for her sake, but to finally silence the cruel voices that had controlled her life for far too long. The morning sun cast long shadows through Lena's kitchen window as she pushed the remains of her toast around her plate. Jonah watched her from across the table, noting how she'd barely eaten half her breakfast. I was thinking, he said carefully, setting down his coffee mug. Maybe we should visit your workshop today. Lena's hand froze mid-motion. The workshop? Her voice quivered slightly. I haven't been there since... I know, Jonah said gently, but it might help us piece together what happened. Plus, you mentioned it was your pride and joy once. It was. Lena's eyes grew distant, remembering. I built that business from nothing. Started fixing motorcycles in my parents' garage when I was 18. By 25, I had my own shop, regular customers, even some vintage restorations. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. People used to come from 3 counties away just to have me work on their bikes. What changed? The smile vanished. After Mark died, I couldn't. The tools, the smell of oil, Everything reminded me of him. He used to hang around the shop sometimes, watching me work. She swallowed hard. The night of the accident, we had that terrible fight right there in the workshop. Jonah leaned forward, his expression encouraging. Maybe it's time to face those memories. Not alone this time. Lena stared at her cold toast for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. The keys are in the drawer by the sink. I haven't even looked at them in months. The walk to the workshop took only 10 minutes, but Lena's steps grew slower with each block. The small brick building sat at the edge of town, its weathered sign reading Harwood Motorcycle Repair, barely visible through years of neglect. Dead leaves had collected against the door, and cobwebs draped the windows like dusty curtains. Lena's hands shook as she fitted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, releasing a musty wave of old oil, metal, and memories. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom. "Wait here," Jonah said, stepping inside first. He found the breaker box and flipped the switches. Ancient fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a time capsule of Lena's former life. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboards, though filmed with dust. A half-dismantled engine sat on a workbench, parts laid out with precision, waiting for hands that had never returned to finish the job. In the corner, a vintage Triumph motorcycle stood partially restored, its chrome dulled by time. "Oh," Lena breathed, stepping inside. Her fingers traced the edge of a familiar wrench. "Everything's exactly how I left it." "You were organized," Jonah observed, noting the methodical arrangement of tools and parts. "Had to be. Mark used to tease me about it." Her voice caught. "Said I was more in love with engines than with him sometimes." Jonah picked up a shop rag, offering it to her. "Let's clean up a bit. While we work, maybe you could tell me about Mark, what he was like?" For the next hour, they wiped down tools and swept floors while Lena slowly opened up. She described meeting Mark at a motorcycle rally, their whirlwind romance, the early years of marriage when everything seemed perfect. "He supported my work at first," she said, sorting through old invoices. "But something changed in the last year. He started making little comments about how much time I spent here, how other wives had normal jobs." "Did he work?" Jonah asked, carefully keeping his tone neutral. "On and off. He had trouble holding jobs. Said his bosses were always out to get him." Lena paused, clutching an old receipt. "That last night he was so angry. Said I was showing him up, making him look bad in front of everyone. We'd never fought like that before." "What happened after the fight?" "He stormed out, got on his bike. I was too upset to follow." Tears spilled down her cheeks. 2 hours later, the police were at my door. They said he'd taken the curve too fast on River Road, lost control. If I hadn't made him so angry. Jonah set down his broom and faced her. "Lena, that letter we found. He wrote it after your fight, before the crash. He wanted to tell you something important. Don't you think that means there might be more to the story?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe you've been carrying guilt that isn't yours to bear. Maybe your husband had his own struggles, his own secrets, that had nothing to do with you or your success." Lena sank onto a shop stool, considering his words. The familiar sense of oil and metal that had seemed suffocating an hour ago now felt almost comforting, like old friends waiting patiently for her return. "I was good at this," she said softly, looking around the workshop. "Really good. Should I have hidden that to protect his ego?" "No," Jonah said firmly. "And I don't think that's what he wanted either. Not if he was trying to tell you something important that night." They worked in companionable silence for another hour, bringing order back to the chaos. With each tool cleaned and replaced, each surface wiped down, Lena felt a subtle shift inside her. as if the workshop's revival was awakening something in her as well. As the afternoon light began to fade, Jonah helped her lock up. Lena paused in the doorway, looking back at the now tidier space. The weight of memory and guilt still pressed on her shoulders, but it felt lighter somehow, more manageable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I couldn't have faced this alone." Jonah nodded, understanding in his eyes. The day had drained her emotionally, but beneath her exhaustion lay something new, a tiny spark of possibility, a whisper that maybe the truth about that night wasn't what she'd believed all these years. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Bend's main street as Lena and Jonah stepped out of her cottage. Lena had made a list of errands, groceries, hardware supplies, and a stop at the pharmacy. Simple tasks that suddenly felt like climbing a mountain. "We can do this another day," Jonah offered, noticing her hesitation. Lena squared her shoulders. "No, I need supplies, and I can't hide forever." Their first stop was Miller's Hardware. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Mrs. Miller's friendly greeting died mid-word when she saw Lena. The older woman's face hardened, and she deliberately turned her back, reorganizing paint swatches that were already perfectly arranged. Lena's fingers trembled as she picked up a basket. "Just need some cleaning supplies," she murmured, more to herself than Jonah. They walked down the narrow aisles, gathering what they needed while Mrs. Miller's eyes followed them like a security camera. At the register, Mrs. Miller rang up their items without a word, her lips pressed into a thin line. When Lena held out her money, the woman hesitated, as if touching it might contaminate her. Jonah's jaw tightened, but Lena placed a gentle hand on his arm, silently asking him to let it go. The pharmacy was worse. A group of church ladies huddled by the vitamin display, their whispers carrying clearly through the quiet store. "Can't believe she's still here." "Poor Mark. If only he'd married Susan instead." "And now she's got some rough-looking stranger wrapped around her finger." Lena's face burned as she quickly grabbed her prescription. The pharmacist, at least, treated her professionally, though his smile never reached his eyes. The grocery store was their final stop. Lena moved efficiently through the aisles, trying to ignore the way conversations stopped when she passed. A young stockboy actually crossed himself when she walked by, making Jonah's hands clench into fists. "How do you stand it?" he asked quietly as they waited in line. "What choice do I have?" Lena replied, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Fighting back only makes them more convinced I'm dangerous." The cashier, a teenager Lena had known since she was in pigtails, wouldn't meet her eyes as she scanned their items. She handled Lena's money like it might bite her, dropping the change on the counter instead of placing it in Lena's outstretched hand. By the time they left the store, Lena's shoulders were rigid with tension. Jonah suggested they take a break, and they found a bench in the small town square. He disappeared briefly into the deli across the street, returning with sandwiches and bottles of water. They sat in companionable silence, watching pigeons peck at crumbs. The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming dogwood trees, a pleasant contrast to the morning's heaviness. "I almost told you to leave last night," Lena admitted suddenly, crumbling a piece of bread between her fingers. "You heard them in there. Being associated with me is like catching a disease in their eyes. You don't deserve that." Jonah took a thoughtful bite of his sandwich before responding. "You know what I've learned from years on the road? Most people will drop you the moment you become inconvenient. They'll find excuses. You're too much work, too complicated, too different. But that says more about them than it does about you." "And you're different?" Lena asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. "I don't abandon people just because others find them inconvenient," he said simply. "Never have, never will." The afternoon sun was setting by the time they carried their bags back to Lena's cottage. Without discussion, she began putting away groceries while Jonah stored the cleaning supplies. The familiar routine of organizing shelves and filling the refrigerator felt oddly comforting after the day's emotional gauntlet. "Stay for dinner?" Lena asked suddenly, surprising herself. "It's getting late, and you shouldn't have to eat alone at that motel." Jonah's smile was warm. "I'd like that." They worked together in the small kitchen, Lena chopping vegetables while Jonah browned chicken in a pan. The sizzle of cooking food and quiet domestic sounds filled the space where painful silence had lived for so long. "I haven't cooked for anyone since—" Lena trailed off, focusing on slicing carrots. "Well, I haven't had a home-cooked meal in months," Jonah replied easily, keeping his tone light. "This is a treat." They ate at her small kitchen table, sharing simple conversation about motorcycle maintenance and favorite roads they'd traveled. For a brief time, the weight of the town's judgment seemed to lift from Lena's shoulders. After dinner, they fell into an easy rhythm at the sink, Lena washing, Jonah drying. Steam rose from the hot water, fogging the window above the sink that looked out onto her small backyard. The mechanical motion of scrubbing plates was meditative, calming. Each clean dish felt like a small victory, a tiny step toward normal life. Standing there in her kitchen, passing soapy plates to Jonah, Lena realized this was the first time in years she'd felt truly comfortable with another person in her space. The simple act of washing dishes together had somehow become more meaningful than she could have imagined. Jonah stacked the last plate in the cupboard and hung the dish towel to dry. The kitchen was clean, warm, and for the first time in too long, it felt like a home rather than a hiding place. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lena's kitchen as she and Jonah mapped out their plan over coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the route to Mike Wheeler's house on a worn town map. "Mike was his best friend," Lena explained, her voice quiet. "If anyone knows what was really happening those last few weeks, it would be him." Jonah nodded, studying her face. "Want me to come with you?" "No," Lena said, straightening her shoulders. "Mike might talk more freely if it's just me. Could you check out Davidson's garage while I'm gone? Tom Davidson worked on his motorcycle the week before." She couldn't finish the sentence, but Jonah understood. They agreed to meet back at the cottage by lunch to share what they learned. Lena's heart pounded as she walked the 3 blocks to Mike's small ranch house. The last time she'd been here was for the funeral reception. Mike's wife answered the door, her smile fading when she recognized Lena. "Is Mike home?" Lena asked, forcing herself to stand tall. A moment later, Mike appeared in the doorway. He'd aged in the past 2 years, his dark hair now streaked with gray, new lines around his eyes. "Lena, what are you doing here?" "I need to know what was really going on with him, Mike. Please." Mike glanced behind him, then stepped onto the porch, closing the door. "Let's walk." They made their way down the quiet street, past neat gardens and white picket fences. Mike kept his voice low. "He got in over his head, Lena. Started going to this underground poker game in Cedar Rapids. At first it was just weekends, but then—" "He was gambling?" Lena's stomach clenched. "How bad was it?" Mike ran a hand through his hair. "Bad enough that some guys from Chicago started showing up, looking for their money. He borrowed against the shop, took out credit cards you didn't know about. That last month he was desperate." Tears burned in Lena's eyes. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "He made me promise not to. Said he'd fix it before you found out." Mike's voice cracked. "The night he died, he told me he was meeting someone at the bridge who could help clear the debt. I should have stopped him." Meanwhile, across town, Jonah pulled his motorcycle into Davidson's garage. The old mechanic was alone, tinkering with an engine. "Help you?" Tom Davidson asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hope so. I'm looking into the accident that happened 2 years ago, the one with Mark Harwood's bike." Davidson's expression darkened. "That was a bad business. Poor Lena never recovered." "Did you work on his motorcycle before the crash?" "Yeah, he brought it in that week. Regular maintenance," he said. Davidson hesitated. But something wasn't right. Jonah leaned against a workbench. "How so?" "The wear patterns on the tires, the way he'd been riding the clutch. It showed a pattern of aggressive driving, like he'd been making a lot of sudden stops and starts. Racing, maybe." Davidson shook his head. "When I heard about the crash, I wondered if he'd been running from something, but the sheriff said there was no evidence anyone else was involved." "Or running to something," Jonah mused. "Thanks for your time." Back at the cottage, Lena and Jonah compared notes over sandwiches. Each new piece of information felt like another weight on Lena's shoulders. "So he was in gambling debt, riding recklessly, and meeting someone at the bridge," Jonah summarized, "and the sheriff closed the case awfully quick." Lena pushed her plate away. "Tom Aldridge and Mark grew up together. If anyone knows what really happened that night." "We'll talk to him tomorrow," Jonah assured her. "One step at a time." The afternoon faded into evening. They'd spent hours reviewing everything they'd learned, trying to piece together the puzzle of Mark's final days. Now they sat at Lena's kitchen table, steam rising from mugs of chamomile tea. Lena wrapped her hands around her mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I keep thinking about that letter we found. I'm finally ready to tell you everything." Was he going to confess about the gambling? Or was there more? "We'll figure it out," Jonah said softly. "You're not alone in this anymore." Those simple words broke something loose inside her. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me sometimes, how safe I feel with you here. I'm not used to that anymore." Jonah's eyes were gentle. "Being safe isn't something you need to feel guilty about, Lena." They sat in comfortable silence until their tea grew cold. Finally, Lena stood and gestured toward the hallway. "The guest room's made up if you want to stay. It's late to head back to the motel." "Thank you," Jonah said simply. They moved through the evening routine, fresh towels, spare blankets, quiet goodnights. As Lena headed to her own room, she paused in the hallway. The cottage felt different with Jonah there, as if his steady presence had begun to fill the hollow spaces grief had carved into her home. She heard him settling into the guest room, the floor creaking softly under his feet. Though they were in separate rooms, the connection between them remained, a fragile thread of trust and understanding that had somehow grown stronger with each passing day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sheriff's office as Lena and Jonah waited in the cramped reception area. Coffee cups littered the desk, and a ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, doing little to dispel the summer heat. Sheriff Tom Aldridge emerged from his office, his face tight with discomfort. "Come on in," he said, not quite meeting their eyes. Inside, Lena perched on the edge of a wooden chair, while Jonah stood behind her, a quiet guardian. The sheriff settled heavily into his creaking desk chair. "Tom," Lena began, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "We need to know what happened the night Mark died." The sheriff shuffled papers on his desk. "That case was closed 2 years ago, Lena. Accident due to weather conditions." "But someone met him at the bridge," Jonah interjected. "We found a letter." Color drained from Aldridge's face. "What letter?" Lena pulled the water-damaged envelope from her purse. "He wanted to tell me everything, Tom. What was he hiding?" The sheriff's shoulders sagged. I didn't want to cause more pain, he said finally. Yes, there was someone else at the bridge that night. A witness saw them arguing, but by the time we got there, he trailed off. Who was it? Lena pressed. Aldridge's fingers drummed nervously on his desk. I can't confirm the identity, but there was a black SUV seen leaving the area shortly before the accident. Jonah leaned forward. And you never investigated? Some things in small towns are better left alone, the sheriff muttered. They left the station an hour later with more questions than answers. The summer afternoon stretched before them, heavy with unspoken truths. Jonah suggested they walk to the park, finding a quiet bench beneath an old oak tree. You're holding something back, he said gently. What is it? Lena twisted her hands in her lap. It's silly. Not if it's hurting you. Tears welled in her eyes. Mark, he changed after I expanded the workshop. Started taking more clients, making a name for myself. He'd make these little comments about how I didn't need him anymore. Jonah waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. I was good at what I did, she continued. Really good. And instead of being proud, he seemed to shrink, like my strength made him feel small. Her voice cracked. Maybe if I'd just... Stop right there, Jonah said firmly. His hand found hers, warm and steady. Real love doesn't diminish itself to make others comfortable. It grows together, supports each other's strengths. But what if... No. His voice was gentle but firm. Your success didn't drive him away, Lena. Whatever demons he was fighting, they weren't your fault. Something fragile shifted inside her chest, like ice breaking up after a long winter. She found herself leaning into his strength, allowing herself to be supported instead of carrying everything alone. As the afternoon waned, they walked back to her cottage. Let's cook dinner, Jonah suggested. Something simple. Soon the kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of herbs. Jonah chopped vegetables while Lena mixed cornbread batter, their movements falling into an easy rhythm. Oh no, Lena laughed suddenly, pulling a blackened pan from the oven. I got distracted and forgot to set the timer. Jonah grinned, waving away smoke. Burnt cornbread, a delicacy in some cultures, I'm sure. Their laughter felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. For the first time in years, hope bloomed in Lena's chest. Not the desperate kind that ached, but something warm and real. The knock came just as they were clearing dishes. 3 sharp raps that made Lena freeze. Sheriff Aldridge stood on her porch, his face grave in the gathering dusk. Can I come in? They settled in the living room, the sheriff perching uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa. I got some new information today, he began. After you left, several witnesses came forward. They'd been afraid to speak up before, but... He took a deep breath. They identified the man at the bridge that night. It was Pastor Harwood. Lena's world tilted sideways. Mark's father? Yes. And Lena, he passed away last night. Heart attack in his sleep. The room spun. Her father-in-law, the stern pastor who'd opposed their marriage from the start, who'd told Mark he was throwing away his future, who'd pressured him constantly to leave her, had been there that night. And now he was gone, taking whatever truth he knew to his grave. No, she whispered. No, no, no. Jonah was beside her instantly, his hands steady around her trembling ones. But she couldn't stop shaking. I knew he didn't approve, she choked out. He told the whole congregation I wasn't good enough for his son. And now we'll never know. I'm sorry, the sheriff said quietly. Maybe it's better this way. Some secrets should stay buried. After he left, Lena collapsed into Jonah's arms, grief pouring out of her in great, gasping sobs. I'm cursed, she whispered against his shirt. "Everyone around me dies. The truth keeps slipping away, and I'm left alone with all these questions." "You're not cursed," Jonah said firmly, holding her close. "And you're not alone. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out." She clung to him in the darkening room, his heartbeat steady under her ear, while outside, crickets began their evening song, and stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky. The morning dawned gray and heavy, matching Lena's mood as she moved through her cottage like a ghost. Her bare feet made no sound on the worn floorboards, and she avoided the creaky spots that might alert Jonah to her movements. The kitchen remained untouched. No coffee brewing, no toast in the ancient toaster that usually provided her morning comfort. Instead, she drifted from room to room, touching familiar objects without really seeing them. Her fingers traced the spine of an old motorcycle repair manual, brushed against the faded curtains, adjusted a crooked picture frame that held happier memories. Each item felt like an accusation now. From the guest room came the soft sounds of Jonah getting ready for the day. Lena retreated to the far end of the house, unable to face his kindness. Her mind kept circling back to the same dark thoughts. Mark was dead. Pastor Harwood was dead. And now Jonah's reputation in town was tarnished because of her. The morning light struggled through cloud cover, casting weak shadows across the living room floor. Lena sat in her favorite armchair, knees pulled to her chest, making herself as small as possible. She could hear Jonah's footsteps approaching but couldn't bring herself to look up. "I made coffee," he said softly from the doorway. Lena shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "You should go," she whispered, "before anything else happens." "Lena." His voice held a gentle warning. "I mean it." Her words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "First Mark, then his father, and now you. Everyone who gets close to me ends up hurt or dead or... Jonah set the coffee mugs down and crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. "Look at me." She squeezed her eyes shut. "Please." Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her head. His eyes held nothing but warmth and concern. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly, "and I won't let you push me away because you're scared." "You don't understand," Lena protested, her voice breaking. "The whole town is already turning against you. They'll make your life miserable, just like they did to me. And what if..." She couldn't finish the thought. "What if something happens to me?" Jonah completed it for her. His hand found hers, steady and warm. "Lena, bad things happen, but they're not happening because of you. You're not cursed, and you're not responsible for other people's choices." She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "The shame you're carrying, it's not yours to bear. Your husband made his own decisions. His father made his. And I'm making mine." "But why?" The question burst from her like a dam breaking. "Why would you stay? Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Jonah's expression softened. "Do you remember that first night, when you offered to undress?" Lena flushed, the memory still raw. "I was desperate, afraid you'd leave if I didn't." "But that's not why I stayed," he interrupted gently. "I stayed because in that moment, even through all your pain and fear, I saw your strength. The way you were willing to lay yourself bare, not for seduction, but for truth. That takes incredible courage." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. "I don't feel very strong anymore." "That's why I'm here," Jonah squeezed her hand, "to remind you until you can see it again yourself." The morning crept toward afternoon. Lena remained withdrawn, but she allowed Jonah to bring her tea, to sit quietly nearby as she processed her grief. Sometimes she would speak, sharing fragments of memories, both good and painful. Other times she just stared out the window, watching clouds drift across the sky. As evening approached, exhaustion began to overtake her. She hadn't slept well the night before, too haunted by the sheriff's news about Pastor Harwood. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts sluggish. Jonah noticed her eyelids drooping as she curled up on the couch. Without comment, he retrieved the soft throw blanket from the back of the armchair. Lena was already drifting off as he gently draped it over her. "You don't have to stay," she mumbled, fighting sleep. "I know," he replied softly. "But I will." Through half-closed eyes, she watched him settle into the armchair with a book. His presence felt like an anchor, keeping her from drifting too far into the darkness of her thoughts. As sleep finally claimed her, Lena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the faintest glimmer of safety. Jonah looked up from his book to study her peaceful face, noting how the worry lines had smoothed in sleep. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still questions to answer, truths to uncover. But he had meant what he said. He would stay until she found her strength again, until hope returned, to replace the shadows in her eyes. The evening settled around them like a gentle embrace. Outside, a light rain began to fall, its soft patter against the windows creating a soothing rhythm. Jonah remained in his chair, a quiet guardian, while Lena slept on, the blanket rising and falling with her steady breathing. The morning sun filtered through the workshop's dusty windows as Jonah methodically sorted through years of accumulated tools and memories. He had suggested Lena take the morning to rest, knowing yesterday's emotional toll had left her drained. The familiar scent of oil and metal surrounded him as he worked, organizing wrenches and replacing old parts on shelves. Moving a heavy toolbox from behind an ancient cabinet, something clattered to the floor. Jonah knelt down, reaching into the narrow space. His fingers brushed against something smooth and rectangular. Pulling it out, he found himself holding a cracked smartphone, its screen spiderwebbed but intact. His heart quickened. Could this be Mark's phone? The one that supposedly vanished the night he died? Jonah carefully slipped it into his jacket pocket and finished tidying the workspace. 20 minutes later, he was knocking gently on Lena's cottage door. She answered, looking tired but more settled than yesterday. "I thought you were at the workshop?" "I was. Found something you need to see." He pulled out the phone. It was wedged behind a cabinet. Lena's face went pale. That's Mark's phone. The police searched everywhere for it after..." Her voice trailed off as she took it with trembling hands. "Do you have a charger that might fit?" She nodded, disappearing into her bedroom. When she returned, she held an old charging cord. "He had the same model I did back then." They sat at her kitchen table, watching the black screen anxiously. After several minutes, a tiny red charging light blinked on. "It might take a while to power up," Lena said softly, "if it even still works." Jonah made tea while they waited. Finally, the screen flickered to life. "There's a voicemail notification," Lena whispered, her finger hovering over the speaker icon. Jonah moved his chair closer, offering silent support as she pressed play. Mark's voice filled the kitchen, slightly distorted but unmistakable. "Lena, I messed up. God, I messed up so bad. Dad's been in my head for months, telling me I'm not man enough to handle your success, that letting you run the shop makes me look weak. I let his fears become mine. But they're his fears, not mine. Not really." A shaky breath. "I'm at the bridge. Came here to think after our fight. I shouldn't have stormed off like that. Shouldn't have let Dad poison what we had. You were never the problem, Lena. Your strength was never the problem. I was just too scared to be worthy of it." Lena's hands covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I'm heading back now. Going to tell you everything. Make this right. I love—" The message cut off, abruptly. Silence filled the kitchen. Lena's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Jonah wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close as grief and relief warred across her face. "All this time," she choked out. "All this time I thought I drove him away. That I was too much, too strong, too independent." "You weren't," Jonah said firmly. "You never were. This proves what I've been trying to tell you. You're not cursed. You weren't responsible for his death. Fear and pride and other people's expectations were the real poison here." She leaned into his embrace, years of shame finally beginning to crack and fall away. "The town needs to hear this," she said after several minutes. "They need to know the truth." Jonah nodded against her hair. "Yes, they do. And this time you won't face them alone." Lena pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. Her face held determination beneath the tears. "No more hiding. No more letting them write my story for me." She looked down at the phone, then back at Jonah. "It's time everyone knew what really happened that night." The morning light streamed stronger through the windows now, touching Lena's face with gold. In her eyes, Jonah saw something new replacing the shadows, the first real spark of freedom. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows as Lena stood before the white wooden doors of First Baptist Church. Her fingers tightened around Mark's phone in her pocket. Jonah stood beside her, steady and calm as always. "You're sure about this?" he asked softly. Lena nodded. "It's time." Together they pushed open the heavy doors. The familiar scent of old hymnals and wooden pews wrapped around her as they stepped inside. Immediately, the quiet murmur of pre-service conversation died. Heads turned. Whispers rose like leaves in autumn wind. Did she really bring him here? On Communion Sunday. After Pastor Harwood's passing, Jonah's warm hand found hers, gripping it firmly. The touch anchored her as they walked down the center aisle. Every step felt weighted with memory. Her wedding day, Mark's funeral, years of sidelong glances and turned backs. They settled into a pew near the middle. More whispers followed, but Jonah's presence beside her helped Lena keep her chin up. She focused on breathing as the temporary pastor, a kind-faced man named Reverend Miller, began the service. The hymns washed over her. Some voices nearby faltered when she sang, as if surprised she remembered the words. But she did remember. She remembered everything. When they reached the prayer request portion of the service, Reverend Miller smiled gently. "Would anyone like to share a burden or blessing?" Lena's heart thundered. This was the moment. Jonah squeezed her hand once, then released it as she stood. "I have something to share," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. She walked to the front, phone clutched tight. "Yesterday, we found my husband Mark's missing phone." Her words echoed in the sudden stillness. "There was a message on it from the night he died. I think you all need to hear it." She pressed play, holding the phone to the microphone. Mark's voice filled the sanctuary, clear and haunting. As he spoke of his father's pressure, of his own fears about Lena's strength, of his regret and love, the congregation sat frozen. Mrs. Peterson, who had led the whisper campaigns, pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. The mechanic who'd spread rumors about Lena tampering with Mark's bike stared at his hands. Elderly Miss Rose, who had crossed the street to avoid Lena for years, began to weep quietly. When the message ended, Lena spoke again. "I've carried the weight of your judgment for 3 years. You called me the Black Widow. You decided I drove my husband to his death. But the truth is, he was coming home to me that night. He chose love over fear. And now I choose forgiveness." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued, "I forgive Pastor Harwood for letting his fears poison his son's heart. I forgive this town for believing the worst of me. And finally, I forgive myself for staying silent so long." Silence held for one heartbeat, then two. Then Miss Rose stood shakily. "Oh, Lena, child, can you ever forgive an old fool?" "We were wrong," Mrs. Peterson added, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "So terribly wrong." One by one, voices rose in apology. Some couldn't meet her eyes, shame bending their shoulders. Others reached for her hands as she walked back down the aisle. Jonah met her halfway, pride shining in his eyes. Together they walked out of the church, leaving behind the weight of whispers and judgment. The morning sun touched Lena's face as they emerged, and for the first time in years, her shoulders felt truly light. She was free. Free from the nickname that had haunted her. Free from the guilt that had crushed her. Free from the lies that had held her captive for so long. Jonah's hand found hers again as they descended the church steps. She didn't need his support to stand anymore, but she held on anyway, grateful for the man who had helped her find her strength again. The truth had finally set her free. The transformation of Willow Bend happened slowly at first, like spring thawing frozen ground. Mrs. Peterson was the first to arrive at Lena's door, carrying a still warm apple pie and tears in her eyes. Then came Miss Rose with her famous chicken casserole, followed by others bearing dishes and sincere apologies. One morning, Lena arrived at her workshop to find the faded sign freshly painted, its letters crisp and welcoming. No one claimed responsibility, but she noticed the pastor's wife smiling knowingly during Sunday service. The shop itself began to buzz with life again. Old customers trickled back, bringing their motorcycles and their contrition. Jonah worked alongside her, his steady presence a comfort as she rediscovered her love for the work. His decision to stay in Willow Bend came naturally, announced over coffee one morning as if he'd never considered leaving. "This place needs a good mechanic," he said, then added softly, "and I need a home." Inspired by her own journey through grief, Lena started gathering women in her living room every Thursday evening. They called themselves Hearts Healing, and soon the group grew beyond just widows. Women carrying all kinds of pain found strength in sharing their stories, just as Lena had found strength in sharing hers. The rebuilt bridge became a symbol of renewal rather than tragedy. Its fresh wooden planks gleamed in the sunlight, and children no longer whispered ghost stories about it. Instead, they skipped across, their laughter carrying over the water below. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges, Lena and Jonah walked to that very bridge. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the river flow beneath them. The water that had once nearly claimed her life now moved peacefully, carrying fallen leaves toward new horizons. Lena turned to look at Jonah, his profile outlined in golden light. "Why did you stay?" she asked quietly, voicing the question she'd held close for so long. Jonah's smile was gentle as he met her gaze. "Because the moment you asked me to stay," he paused, his voice full of warmth, "was the moment I stopped running." Hand in hand, they walked back toward town. The evening air carried the scent of hope and new beginnings. Around them, Willow Bend had become a different place. Not perfect, but healing. Just like them, the town had learned the transformative power of truth, redemption, and compassion. Their footsteps fell in sync as they headed home, each step carrying them further into a future neither had imagined possible just months before. A future built on second chances and the courage to begin again. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.